I want to bring up our last but not least panel. I'm going to have the chair of the Lusk Center Advisory Board, Bill Witte, who is also, as you know, the chairman of Related California, whose hospitality we are enjoying today in this beautiful venue. Bill, will you bring up and introduce your panel, please?
Well, welcome everybody. I hope you're enjoying the Conrad. It only took us 18 years to get this built. It seems to have turned out well. So I'm going to introduce the panel in a second, but the background is really about this. I think many of you may know when Gavin Newsom got elected governor, he announced a very ambitious goal of like 3.5 million new homes a year to deal with the state's persistent housing crisis. And on the one hand, I've seen more proactive activity from the state in pushing housing and overriding local controls, state legislatures involved, than I've ever seen in my professional lifetime. On the other hand, we're still far behind. Today, we're going to talk about what exactly does all this mean? What's going on with cities' housing elements? They theoretically have to produce these every year, but until recently, the state had no teeth in enforcing that. That's changing. What's the regional housing needs assessment or RHNA numbers that you hear being kicked around at the local planning level, for example? And then lastly, is anything going to come of this? What are the implications? What are the sanctions? Are there real opportunities? Many of you in this room in the multifamily business. Does this open up opportunities? And if so, how can they be realized? To my left is Jenna Hornstock, who's Deputy Director for Planning in the Land Use Division of the Southern California Association of Governments, the agency that produces the regional housing needs assessment numbers for individual cities. But I think equally relevant, we were talking about this a little the other day, Jenna is also a member of the Los Angeles City Planning Commission, which probably sees more proposals for housing than any place in the state. And before that was at the LA Community Redevelopment Agency, with whom we and many others worked in downtown LA and other neighborhoods. And to her left is Larry Tucker. Larry, his day job is as a real estate investor, developer. He's an experienced real estate attorney. His nighttime job has been to advise the city of Newport Beach, which historically never thought too much about these issues, on getting an approved housing element, which they've done, and trying to ascertain where can housing actually be built, not just planned. And for all of that work, Larry was paid exactly zero. But he has a long history in helping the city, member of the Planning Commission, Financial Advisory Board, et cetera. So we have a regulatory agency and we have an implementation arm of the city. So I want to open by asking Jenna to explain for us, tell us about the regional housing needs assessment. Where does this come from? How were decisions made, et cetera?
So, as I want to start this by, as you go into this presentation, I'm going to explain the RHNA and try to do it in about 10 minutes. But just to give some context from where you were all sitting and what I generally know about this audience, I spent the first 20 years of my public sector career doing redevelopment. I ran the joint development program at LA Metro, so it was about public-private real estate development, getting housing built, although I think I did negotiate something to do with this property when I was at CRA. That's where I met you. But I never paid attention to the RHNA. I just want you to know that. I didn't know what I never even read a housing element. So if you're sitting there going, why should I care about this? I think what Bill said is really important. It is different now. It's really different how the RHNA was done, what it means for housing elements, and really what it means for you all as developers, land use people, investors. So what I hope you take away from this short overview of what the RHNA is it is a good thing to talk about and understand with the cities when you're looking for entitlements, when you're investors, when you're talking about risk and likelihood of development, et cetera. So hopefully that's where I get us to. Quickly, if you don't know what SCAG is, we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we are designated by federal law for urbanized areas. And what we do, we are statutorily required to do, but we address large regional issues. We are the largest MPO in the state. We're ridiculously large. We cover 6 counties, 191 cities, about 19 million people. We're about half the state population, and you can see some statistics about how giant we are and the economy size, but you see our 6 counties of Ventura, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial. So just a huge area that we cover. And our roles and responsibilities are primarily statutorily required. So we are required by federal law to do the regional transportation plans. So that's really about all projects coming in the region. And the important thing to know between number 1 and number 3, the FTIP, what you need to know is like if a project isn't on our list and in our plan, then it's not likely to get federal or state funding. So that's the important thing to know. It's a good place to look if you want to understand across any area you're investing what transportation projects are planned for, and whether they're funded or not, because some are and some aren't. Importantly, though, for the state of California, we are required per SB 375 to also produce the Sustainable Community Strategy. So 1 and 2 we do together, the RTP SCS. We do it every 4 years. Our last one was adopted in 2020, and it's called Connect SoCal. What we're going to focus on today is number 4, the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and I'll tell you how that comes to be. But importantly, we have a ton of data. I call us the data nerds of the region. We produce growth forecasts, population, jobs. We do a lot on GHG reductions and impacts of all kinds of things in the region. A lot of data. We have lots of PhD type folks cranking numbers all the time and doing modeling. And then importantly, you can see in this photo, our regional council is made up of 86 elected officials. So we are a really great audience to get in front of elected officials. We meet monthly. We have policy committees. We have events. So we're a really important forum for discussion and educating of our elected officials and bringing things forward. So our housing program, just to get a sense, the first box you see, the RHNA, until 2019, that's all we did with housing. It was, here's your RHNA number, see you in 8 years. Now, we talked a bit, and Bill talked about the governor and this commitment to housing. So what started happening at the state level around 2019 is the state started dropping a ton of money to tell cities, you better get it together and you better do land use planning to get your housing done. And I just want to note how important that is, however you feel about the governor or politics. As you know, most elected officials want a groundbreaking. They want a picture, right, that they can take, like we did it. This is not sexy stuff that they're funding us to do, but it's the bones, right? It's the infrastructure to get housing built, the land use planning, the plans, understanding where you need to make investments in all kinds of things to make it happen. It's not fun to talk about, but it's really foundational, and they dropped tons of money. $250 million in 2019. That's when I came to SCAG about 2 years ago to help lift up some of these large grant programs. So we've got 2 large programs going, housing working groups, we're doing policy development. So we've really dramatically expanded our space in housing. So the RHNA, we're going to dive in. How does the RHNA happen? So importantly, it starts with the State Department of Finance doing a projection of population and jobs. And then HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, comes in, and they use that to estimate new housing units. And then what HCD does is they take it to our regions through MPOs like SCAG, and they say, here's your number for your region. But I want you to know that in this most recent cycle, we're in the 6th cycle. I should back up. These happen every 8 years, RHNA cycle, and they're different for every region. So for the SCAG region, it's 2021 to 29, but it's different in different regions of the state, just so you're aware. But everyone's in the 6th cycle. But what's really important to note is this time HCD said, and the state as a whole, oh, we're not just looking at growth. That's not the only thing, because actually population growth is going down a bit, right? They said, we're going to look at all the units you didn't produce last cycle, because we know you didn't. And we're going to look at cost-burdened households, people paying more than 30% of their income on rent. And we're going to look at overcrowding. And we're going to put all that into your number. Have at it. And you got 8 years to fix this. So the number comes to us, your COG or MPO, they kind of, not going to get into it, they're interchangeable at times. And then what we have to do is come up with a methodology for taking that whole region-wide number and distributing it to all of our 191 cities and 6 counties. And we do that based on a number of factors, and I'll share that. So the locality gets the number from us, and then they have to update their housing element to show how they are going to meet that number in the next 8 years. And then it's up to you all, the development community, to deliver those units, right? So understand the limits of, who's got power to do what. The cities can say, we're going to do this, and here's how we're going to do it through a housing element, but they can't really build it. So here's the big moment here. You see our 4th, 5th, and 6th cycle. This is every 8 years. 5th cycle, you can see, went down a bit. That was largely due to recession. But the 6th cycle is 3 times bigger than the fifth cycle. So understand, we didn't make it into the fifth cycle. We did not produce those 412,000 units. We now have a number that was 3 times larger. So just kind of taking that in, you can imagine the pandemonium that was unleashed. First of all, we as SCAG and at the advising of our regional council fought that number, but we lost. So we said, okay, we're gonna come up with a methodology. And what I want you to understand now about the methodology, so we talked about big shift at the state level. They said, we're gonna look differently at housing need. We at SCAG said, we're gonna look differently about how we allocate this number. And we really wanna think about our regional goals and what we do in our mission. I'm not gonna take you through the process, but you should note that we come up with the methodology, we give out the number. We had 48 appeals, like we're famous for, like infamous across the MPOs. This was unheard of that we had 48 RHNA appeals. But we finalized that number in March of 21. It was adopted by our board, and that was the number that is our main regulatory power, that's done. If you appealed and you lost, that's it, it's over, this is your RHNA number, and it is statutory and it's required by state law. And now you have to update your housing element. And it just is a note from Kome Ajise, our executive director, but what's important is when we did this methodology, we really tried to align it with the goals of our regional plan. And so what that meant is our methodology looked at not just household growth. That's all we used to look at, right, is kind of generally projected growth. We looked at job accessibility, we looked at transit accessibility, and we had a social equity adjustment, really trying to make sure that we're not, concentrating, say, low-income units in one area or all the housing in one area. This is a map of just the job accessibility, looking at could you get to a job within 30 minutes in your car, and you start to see the trend, which is what happened with this RHNA, which is more coastal and infill development. So this was a really big deal about who got what numbers, and it was different than how we did it before, and it's caused a lot of, I don't know about consternation, but depending on where you sit in the region, how you feel about infill versus greenfield development, becomes a big point of discussion. So just to give you a sense of how things have shifted at the state and then at our regional level for the RHNA. And then the cities have to put together their housing elements, and what's important now is the state, as Bill mentioned, put a lot more teeth into the housing element. So these are the things statutorily a housing element needs to do, but key things to note is the state beefed up the site inventories. They said, you better tell us how you're gonna meet these 1.3 million units across the region. And by the way, if you point to some strip mall and say that strip mall with a donut shop and a convenience store and whatever is gonna become 400 units of housing, we don't know if we believe you. You got to give us a relative development likelihood scenario. It became really, and Larry will talk about this, challenging for cities, really hard, and there was a lot of back and forth. The other big piece is affirmatively furthering for housing. You can look that up, but it really had to do with not concentrating, say, low-income units or housing in areas that are lower resource, meaning is it an area with parks and schools and access to amenities? That's a high resource area, and we want to make sure, particularly, that we can get units serving lower income households into those high opportunity areas. So this was, again, a new requirement for a lot of analysis. So you can imagine it got really hard this cycle, and it's caused a lot of consternation between cities and the state, because on top of these new regulations, and you heard about this a bit in our last panel, the state started dropping a lot of rules. Like if you're not in compliance, all kinds of by right development. We heard a little bit about the builder's remedy this morning. All these things, a lot of these things are triggered if you are out of compliance on your housing element. So there are real consequences about how this plays out. It was tough, we had a larger number, a lot of changes to the housing law, and again, all the regions are on different cycles. So we're early in the 6th cycle, so all these changes came down and we didn't have examples to look at about how to do this. This guidance on AFFH came out super late in the process. It required iterative community feedback. There were no examples of what kind of analysis they wanted, and yet our cities had to produce these analysis and meet state requirements. We were in a pandemic. That made it kind of hard. People quit their jobs to stay home, take care of kids or elderly folks. The other thing, the embarrassment of riches, I mentioned a ton of money. $250 million dropped at the same time to do a bunch of housing policy nerd work, right? Like all land use stuff. All that money couldn't be absorbed by the consultant market. I mean, this sounds like, why am I telling you this? But like we would put out RFPs for work and no one would respond. So all this is happening at the same time going on with cities trying to produce these documents and testing your pop culture knowledge. I call it everything, everywhere, all at once. Like it was just too much for our cities. No one's laughing, you do not watch pop culture movies, okay. Depends on the crowd who gets this one. Watch the movie. So the main thing is needed is To note, right now, actually the number I found out yesterday, we're at 79 of our jurisdictions are in compliance on their housing elements out of 197. That's not good. It means with all the new rules, a lot of back and forth. So instead of focusing on getting the housing built, our cities are going to be fighting with the state about compliance and trying to prove that they're not a bad actor. That's the word folks at the state use, bad actors. It means you're ineligible for a lot of funding for cities, and we're fighting to make sure your projects are ineligible. So if you apply for funding, you probably have Bill, AHSC, and all that stuff. If you're not in a compliant housing element or in a pro-housing city, which you cannot be if you don't have a compliant housing element, you get dinged, which we all think is not where we all want to row, in that same direction. And that's it. So that's kind of a status of where we're at.
So I'm going to come back to some of the practical implications of this for real projects. But Larry, you were somehow able to get the city of Newport Beach to be in compliance with their housing element, which I didn't really think was possible. But I think you also can channel some of the consternation that Jenna referred to. Tell us how you did that.
Well, first of all, Newport Beach had a fifth cycle requirement of 5 housing units. 5. In the sixth cycle, we somehow ended up bumping it up slightly to 4,845 units in a built-out city. And shockingly, we never got a call from anybody at the state saying, hey, do you guys have any land down there that you might house some units? They just kind of went through the process, and Jenna did a great job of explaining how they came up with their approach. But what the cities thought about it, as best I could tell, really wasn't part of the process. And it wasn't part of the process, quite frankly. I just think the state got to the point where they said, you know what? We're kind of tired of city councils constantly turning down housing developments whenever enough people showed up and howled at them at public meetings. The ones I always love being a developer is if people come down and complain about projects going on in areas where I'm trying to develop by saying, I moved here to avoid all that. And it's kind of like, well, wait a second, you moved here. Who built the house where you moved to? But at any rate, we then kind of looked at it and thought, well, we're going to fight this thing tooth and nail. This is crazy. I can't possibly be serious. Where are we going to put all these housing units? But we also looked at what the state had empowered themselves to do, which was impose penalties. And the penalties were very draconian if you didn't have an improved housing element. And we only had a few of the remedies then. They've continued to adopt more and more punitive measures, in my mind, in the interim. So the mayor said to me, well, probably ought to form a committee to figure out where the 4,800 units could possibly go. And the cities don't have any duty to see that the units get built. They only have a duty to plan for the units. And so the mayor said, we need to come up with a plan to comply. And my committee was called the Housing Element Update Committee, but we really referred to it as the Plan to Comply Committee. And I felt like the biggest problem we were going to have was, well, where do those units go? And that's what we focused on, was locations. Now, the thing that Jenna didn't mention is that in addition to just the sheer allocation of units, the allocation also was broken down by income categories as to what your goals were. 49% of the units that were allocated in Newport Beach were supposed to be in the lower income area of the RHNA, which is 80% of housing affordable to those making 80% or less of median income in the jurisdiction. Okay? Stop and think about that. If any of you are familiar with Newport Beach, we don't have a lot of that available. It's always like 180% of median income, not 80%. So when we went to property owners to say, hey, how would you like to rezone your property? I mean, that's a developer's dream, and a use that you would like to have. The first thing you think about when you find a property that looks like it's pretty good is, if I have to rezone it, I've got to go through the whole general plan, zone change process, throw in CEQA, which almost guarantees a lawsuit if it's a big enough property. And here the state was going to basically, run interference for getting the zonings, the land use changes done. So we felt like as we went around, we do have a lot of surface parking lots. We have in the airport area where buildings got built, but they didn't build parking structures because the land was cheaper back then. And when you inquire to those property owners, hey, how would you like to have your property rezoned? It was, yeah, that might be pretty good. Well, but we're going to have to plan for 49% of it to be affordable. It was, what? How's that going to work? Well, of course, it doesn't work. And ultimately, what we ended up doing in Newport Beach to come up with a plan to comply was to do almost all of it by zoning overlay. So the base zoning stayed in place, and an overlay was placed on the property which allowed for housing as an alternative use. You could continue to have the use that you had if you didn't want to change it, or you could change to housing, or you could do a combination of the two. So we just kind of focused on the entire city, everything that wasn't already residentially zoned. We put an overlay on if the property had any prospects for being residential. And it, in a way, it was kind of the approach I came up with. I couldn't see any other way to do it. But in a way, that insulated us from claims by the state that we weren't rezoning enough properties, because we were able to say we rezoned every property that had feasibility for housing. Now, the overlay texts are going to start becoming the next battleground for those compliant cities, because you have a period of time in which to actually then do the general plan change in the land use element, and then ultimately the zoning. So if you have a compliant city and you have an overlay, and this is probably going to be of most interest to you out there, look for those properties in the general plan of the cities that you're interested in having projects in, or you see a property that looks like it might work. Because if it is in the housing element that's compliant, then it has to then be taken to the land use element, ultimately to the zoning that allows a project to be built. And it's not just your project. The cities and county and undeveloped, unincorporated areas have to actually implement the housing element for the property owners. That's the only way it's going to get done. Back to the point with the city council saying no to changes to zoning, and neighbors being unhappy about it and complaining, that stuff's kind of washed aside. And that was a big deal in Newport Beach, is to kind of convey to people that showed up and complained at our hearings, I'm sorry, we just can't pay attention to you.
Larry, let me ask you,
a few things
on
that are
that
interesting,
point,
but not.
let me ask you a question, because that's a very good point. For those in the audience, to the extent that's really true, that's a complete sea change in local entitlements of getting projects through. But first question, Newport Beach had passed on the ballot, 15 years ago, the so-called Green Light Initiative, which among other things said you can only do so many units in the Fashion Island neighborhood. Can this process countermand a pre-existing approved ballot measure?
Well, Encinitas had apparently a similar measure, and they've got litigation that's gone from here to eternity with all sides suing all sides. But it's kind of hard to imagine that our Green Light Initiative, that the state, it basically requires an approval of the electorate. If you change the general plan on a property and you end up with 100 housing units or more, that's not like that big of a project when you got 4,800 units to do. It's a little difficult for me to imagine that that'll fail at the ballot, because they almost all fail. Every ballot initiative for housing fails. And the city saying to the state, God, we'd love to have done those housing units, but doggone it, we've got green light and it got rejected, and therefore we can't do it. So my belief is the state will not accept that, and they will litigate it. Their housing element law predated our green light by 40 years. So my expectation is there will be litigation, but the political branch, our city council, is going to abide by what's in our charter. it will go to the ballot, it will get defeated, and then we're going to find the answer to that question, which I think the state will just overrule it all.
So, Jenna, let me ask you a different version of that question. Maybe this has come up in your planning commission role in LA. It's been unfortunately very traditional, we have the scars to show it, that if neighbors don't like, if voters don't like local approvals, they can collect signatures and force a project to the ballot. So now we're in this housing element RHNA world. Let's say city says, okay, I've got to somehow do 3,500 units, and the only way I can do it, I'm sorry, it makes sense from a planning point of view to do 250 of them here, and the neighbors say, okay, I'm going to collect signatures and put it on the ballot. A, can they legally do it? And B, would that hold up?
I mean, I don't know how to answer on the ballot. What I keep thinking as you're talking is, generally speaking, the state overrules local land use control. They can and they do. So what I don't know is how that relates to like a ballot initiative, of the people. But I don't know if an attorney in here could answer. Like I would think it doesn't matter, but I would think the state would still reign supreme in terms of land use control, and this is kind of the theme of what we're talking about. I'm not sure, but what I mostly see and where I think it's important and relevant in terms of this, like how does this show up at the neighborhood level, and particularly with the Planning Commission, is SB 330, which is the Housing Accountability Act, which existed for many years. I can't remember the year, but then again, with this recent slate of everything going on at the state, got some more teeth to it. And SB 330 basically says, it says to a city that you cannot deny a housing project, an entitlement request, unless if it agrees with objective development standards. Now, what are objective development standards? I mean, there's all kinds of that stuff in specific plans, in general plans, et cetera. But the way it shows up at Planning Commission, every single meeting, every one, is generally people come and they say, I don't like this project, it blocks my view, or it's creating too much traffic, or I disagree with another state provision of CEQA streamlining, and they did a CEQA streamlining effort, and we disagree with the findings. We sit there as a planning commission, and I'll be frank, we are a very pro-housing planning commission, very pro-housing, so I don't think we have a problem approving housing, but we sit there and we say, our president she is amazing. I don't think I could have made it through my time on the commission without her ability to navigate these meetings. But she says, we hear you. We want you to know that we hear you, but I need to explain what SB 330 says. And it basically says, we got no power to do anything. If we try to change your project in any way, even if we think it's reasonable to say 1 story less, or change the windows, or change where the trash trucks are going to come, the developer can claim that we are imposing a new development standard that makes the project infeasible. So, and we get letters every meeting from attorneys and YIMBY groups saying, yeah, go ahead and try to deny this project, we're going to sue you. So it becomes a question of, so I actually think more than a voter proposition, I think like SB 330 is really, really powerful in terms of the ability that cities have even at the margins to change or deny housing projects. So that's what I see every single meeting.
The other thing you might see is a continued involvement of the state legislature. And while it's not in Southern California, I think some of you may be familiar with what happened at UC Berkeley. It was earlier this year, last year. The campus desperately in need of more student housing. They proposed building more adjacent to the university. A neighborhood group sued under the California Environmental Quality Act and prevailed. The court said, I know there's a need, but they didn't check these boxes, whatever. Within a month, California State Senator from San Francisco, Scott Wiener, introduced legislation which passed the legislature, was signed by the governor, that overturned the court's decision. They said, I'm sorry, this is a compelling public requirement, we need to do it, and they did it. It could also go the other way. You could see someone introducing legislation saying, state is intervening too much, they have to stop. But let me now come back, get into the weeds a little more, Larry, on, okay, you've passed a housing element. You have these goals, requirements at various income levels. Talk about the feasibility or infeasibility, absent public funding, of trying to achieve those.
Well, I mean, Bill, you're you're a true expert on this, but you understand, and everybody out there should understand that affordable housing means that there's a subsidy. And the question is, where do the subsidies come from that then would entice a property owner who has a perfectly good operating other type of use to switch over to a housing use? And ultimately, it's always going to be a dollar and cents proposition. Maybe you'll have that odd case where somebody is so charitable that they'll lose money to switch over to housing. But most people are going to be rational, and you can just assume that there's going to need to be enough of an incentive to justify switching over and accommodating whatever affordable housing is needed. And the incentives come in three varieties. There's federal programs, which are 9% tax credits, which are basically 100% affordable housing projects, 4% tax credits, which can be for 100% affordable projects. Those are at the federal levels. And at the state level, there's a state density bonus law, which does, in addition to granting density bonuses in exchange for a certain commitment to a certain level of affordable housing, it also waives development standards, which can be, very important. And then at the local level, the third way of going about it is an inclusionary zoning type of law. And for Newport Beach in our housing element, we weren't willing to commit in our housing element to adopting that law as a formal, full-time, permanent matter, because it just was going to take time to try to figure out, well, how do we do this? Because the airport area maybe can afford a 15% affordable imposition. Other areas, like in Fashion Island, maybe it's 7%. In other words, the number is not quite known, but it's a local imposition that the city has to look at, because we said in our housing element to the state, which said to us, hey, great, got your housing element. How are you guys going to make sure all these units get done and we get some affordable housing? We had to commit to come up with policies. And one of the policies was some type of inclusionary zoning ordinance, but it's so complicated financially that it's just going to take a period of time for the city to actually figure out, how do we do that?
I mean, one of the challenges with that, I say as a developer, is we say to cities, because we do more mixed income housing than I think anybody, is if you're in a market, San Francisco, at least until recently, Santa Monica, with super high rents, there is some ability to use those high rents to internally subsidize on-site affordable housing. If you're in a more middle income market, that spread doesn't exist. It's much harder to accomplish. So Jenna, let me ask you this, with your planning commission hat on, I read about all these projects getting approved, and almost every one seems to invoke density bonus. Yeah. The good news is more height, more units, in theory, less residual land value, or to the developer at least. Do these work? Are these actually happening? I mean, they're getting approved, but in other words, to Larry's point, how feasible are these? They are also somewhat in furtherance of the city's housing element.
Yeah, I mean, I want to lift up for a moment. I mean, Larry was talking about the incentives. I think the direction we're headed to meet our RHNA goals and the amount of affordable housing that needs to be built at various income levels is not a subsidy driven, but using incentives driven. So density bonus, parking reductions, waiver of development standards, which is a really big deal. Most of the projects that come to us are appeals, I would say, because people are appealing the density bonus, or in LA City, the transit oriented communities determination, which is like a density bonus on major steroids. And they're usually pissed about the waiver of development standards. And I will say mostly I'm good with them. There are a few that I'd say flagrantly abuse the state law. One in particular I've seen lately that's pretty bad in terms of just, it's not a livable building. But an architect helped me out one day. He cornered me at a party and said, don't worry, the building, that will never get built. The building department, to your point, won't ever let that get built. But what I just want to impress upon this audience, and please, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're really powerful incentives. They have real monetary value. The amount of parking reduction, the amount of density you get by right, some of the requirements in the building and height and all these kinds of things that you can get waivers on, they have real economic value. So maybe I'm optimistic or Pollyanna-ish, but I believe that these incentives can work, and we just don't have to say, oh, you need a subsidy to meet those. But part of it has to do with how aggressive the city is in embracing them. The city of LA has been, but that said, I can't tell you how many have been built. I do know that in LA City, which through Measure J in 2016, there was this measure, I'm not going to get into that because it required PLAs for any zone change, project labor agreements, but there was like 3 lines in the measure that said, oh, by the way, the city must come up with an ordinance to further support affordable housing near transit. And, some planners went crazy with that in a good way and wrote a really powerful model ordinance or ordinance called the Transit-Oriented Communities Ordinance, which, because it was part of an initiative approved by voters, did not require CEQA approval. It didn't even require city council approval. It didn't require city planning commission approval. They just wrote it because they were required to, and that is this density bonus on steroids. And 30% of the permits and entitlements for multifamily in the city since 2017 have come in under that program, the TOC ordinance. That's how powerful it is. And it requires, depending on how affordable you do it, 8 to 11% low or extremely low units. And so we're getting more extremely low units entitled and permitted in the city than ever, with mostly no financial subsidy. Some are like 100% affordable, but I can't tell you if they're being built yet. It's been since 2017, but I can't tell you that they're happening.
I said there are 3 levels. The second level was the state level. To me, it's a subsidy, the density bonus, not a cash subsidy.
Yeah.
But it's a subsidy in terms of you get something that you otherwise weren't going to get unless you did a certain level of affordable units. So those are you have state, federal, and local possibilities, all designed for the same thing. I can only really speak to what's happens at the city level, and that's going to be some type of inclusionary requirement that's going to be in. That's going to then have to be met in order to take advantage of these other available opportunities.
So I suspect a lot of people in the audience are thinking, oh, wait a minute, does that mean, for example, that if I have a site that is currently zoned for 55 or 65 feet, that I, with no fear of opposition, of effective opposition, I can go to 12 stories now if I wanted to. It's more costly, but if I wanted to, and they can't stop me? Is that effectively the case? In other words, let's say you're on the edge of a single family neighborhood, because a lot of Southern California is that. Can you really just say, I'm going 5 or 7 more stories and you can't stop me? As long as you do that required affordability.
Right. Bill, I haven't done any multifamily of any scale at all, so I'm really probably not the person to ask. But you can waive development standards, and height is usually a development standard.
Yep.
And my guess is that there's probably that that opportunity is going to be there. Now there may be something else in the law that I'm not aware of that happens at the state level. But generally speaking, the goal isn't to have as comfortable of a project for the surrounding community as possible. It's to get a project done. And if the state feels like, that's necessary to generate the housing, their preference is for the housing to be generated and not to protect all the surrounding properties that were built and developed and lived in and bought and sold with the idea in mind that things are going to always kind of generally be designed in this fashion. The state said that's not as important as unit count.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. I mean, I can't tell you exactly the stories, and I don't know off the top of my head the triggers, but it's all about, there's a number of things, and again, they're all in various kind of density bonus streamlining laws at the state level. I mean, LA City has its own kind of additional, but just statewide, Newport Beach, any city in the state, if you look at the state density bonus law, it'll tell you the different ways that you trigger, but definitely the waiver of development objectives. I can't tell you the number of stories, but there's literally the city can't do anything, without triggering lawsuits. I want to just do a quick plug. This week, we just published, as part of all those grants I mentioned, we surveyed our cities to see what they needed help understanding, because some of it is them catching up and knowing what the rules are, so that when you go into the counter or planning department or whatever, the staff needs to know. So we just published a whole series of short, well, some are longer, explanations of all the various streamlining bills. So it's some reading to do, but it lays out really clearly how they work. I hope they're helpful. So if you look at them and they're not helpful, let us know. We're actually about to do some workshops also that we're going to record and put on our website. So we're trying to get the word out more, but I want to note that they are powerful. People are using them, and yeah, you can go in and get a project approved. And if you need help, by the way, go to the LA City Planning Commission website and just pull any of the staff reports where somebody is objecting to a density bonus, and the staff lays out all the reasons. Like, it's a really good way to learn how to do a density bonus project is to read a staff report where they talk about somebody objecting to it and appealing it, and why the city says they can't, because they lay out every time the rules.
Of course, part of the problem is a lot of the smaller cities don't have a Jenna Hornstock. So you go to the city and what? I don't know. But that's another issue.
Yeah.
Last question, I want to open up to some questions. As Jenna said, there are a lot of incentives now to encourage people to move forward with more and denser housing. At the state level, because there's SB 330 is one that maybe is a little bit different, a lot of them deal with waiving CEQA requirements and process. But you cannot get a housing bill out of the state without labor standards politically. It will not happen. Recently, some of you may have seen Assembly Bill 2011, backed by the Carpenters Union but opposed by the building trades, took a small step in that direction by allowing for non-residential sites, shopping centers, whatever, to avoid CEQA and be processed more quickly as long as the construction paid prevailing wages, which is a little bit short of union. It could be union, but not necessarily. A little more flexible. Contractor have to have a health care plans, things that are not entirely unreasonable. And our response was a small step for mankind. I mean, it's for 100% affordable projects, most of which have to do that anyway, it's great. Outside the big cities, however, few developers build union or prevailing wage, especially in parts of the state where there's not a lot of union capacity. It's hard to say how much people will take advantage of that. Just something to think about as you all consider moving forward. The density bonus thing is a powerful tool. Let me open it up to questions. And it can be as
one observation on that I've, that is I find ironic is there couldn't be anything more important than housing to certain parts of our legislative bodies. But then they require prevailing wage if these subsidies are taken advantage of and come from sources that are almost involved in every project. And you just kind of have prevailing wage means it's more expensive to build, which means you can build fewer units and still have it make economic sense. So what's really more important? Labor or affordable housing? And in this particular case,
well, politically, so far,
chosen.
Dare I say it, politically, labor has been a precondition. And now we're at record high construction costs, which is almost counterintuitive given that we're, in a declining commercial, usually goes in the other direction, hasn't yet. In any event, that will be an ongoing challenge. Questions? Specific, general? Yes.
My name is Stone James. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Cathedral City. We've got a lot of really good investment opportunities out there. However, having come from the private sector, it really feels like these RHNA numbers are really almost constitute a taking of land values. And so I don't know how that is going to come to pass. And then also, we're a city, we do not have millions of dollars in order to subsidize the different housing projects. In fact, we just completed a deeply affordable housing project, 60 units. And the only way that happened was we gave them the 10 acres. We have no more land. We gave them those 10 acres, and we gave them $1.5 million. And then they had to cobble together 9 other sources of capital. And so, the big question is how does a city like us meet these numbers?
Well, I'm going to make a general comment, and then I'm going to let Jenna countermand me a little bit.
Go for it.
And in fairness, SCAG, Southern California Association, is not the ultimate arbiter. HCD is at the state level. But what I've told cities is, where we're working, I've said, look, these numbers to me represent what the state believes could lead to an equilibrium of supply and demand, which we're so far away from. That's why the numbers are so huge. Realistically, most cities can't get to that number, at least in the short run. If you, however, in your housing element, as I think Larry was able to accomplish in Newport Beach, show the city that you really tried, the state, I'm sorry, you really tried. You were doing 40 units a year, and now you have land to do 750, but your number is 2,000. I think the state's going to say, all right, keep working, you got to do better, but you're okay. I mean, that good, you're making incremental progress. The affordable housing issue, we deal all the time. You're exactly right. It's just numbers. There's no such, we're the largest affordable housing developer in San Bernardino County. The land is cheap, construction's a little less, but it's subsidies from the state or somewhere, and they're highly competitive. And which might be true of Cathedral City. Now I'm going to make your case. As Jenna said, all the state programs now are geared to encouraging affordable housing in so-called high resource areas, better schools, amenities, etc. A noble objective. But what if you're not? Then you can't win in the competition to get those.
So two things I want to address. First of all, hello, Cathedral City, we represent you. I happen to love Perez Road and buy art there whenever I can, yeah? Good tip to anybody who likes to buy art. It's great. My favorite little spot. Two things I want to say. So you touched on this low resource, high resource area, and I was at a different panel last night at UCLA, I'm making the rounds, talking about affirmatively furthering fair housing, and there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the what AFFH means. Yes, we want more affordable housing in high resource areas, but if you're an area that is lower income, you still need to invest in those communities. We're not saying just totally disinvest. I mean, so if you're providing affordable housing in a lower resource area, you can talk about other reasons that's important and make the case. So it's not quite that cut and dry. It's, again, the housing elements that are being adopted have a whole section on affirmatively furthering fair housing. So the city's going to tell you in that document what they're looking for, and it's not just build in the high resource areas, it's also address the needs for quality housing in your lower resource areas. So I want to make that clear. We were having a debate about that last night. But in terms of you, here's what I would say. I don't know your market economics, but I know it costs, depending on where you are, $15,000 to $25,000 to have someone come in, an economist or a real estate consultant, and do a study of what it costs to build and what the rents are. And what they can tell you is what's kind of the right flexibility to incentivize the market to deliver the units. And I wouldn't recommend looking at all subsidized units. I would recommend looking at the density bonus and all the power you have to provide. There is so much financial incentive in parking reductions and height. There's all kinds of things you can do that have real economic value to a builder, right? A lot of you are builders and you know what these things cost. So I would challenge the city to say, how can we figure it out? And I know Richard standing back there has worked on different studies showing the feasibility, right? When you talked about Bill, the TOC working in high rent areas. I think, Richard, you were part of a study that was done with Marlon Burnett and a bunch of others on the city's TOC ordinance. So maybe students could do it for you through their class, but you can do a market feasibility to figure out how to tweak your zoning or an inclusionary program or whatever to get those units. And I can't tell you what would work, but that's what I would do if I was sitting in your position, is try to figure that out.
Yeah, you don't have to, the units don't have to be built as affordable units. The way that the statutory protocol works or the scheme works is that when somebody goes to pull a building permit on a site that's been identified as covering 50% affordable, allocation, and they only pull permits for 15%, what the state says is, well, where do the other 35 units go? You have to rezone more property. In other words, it's just a continuing effort to have more property zoned for residential. So the units don't actually have to be built. But the city of Newport Beach, as Jenna mentioned, we did commission a study to look at our various areas of town because we hadn't adopted the inclusionary housing ordinance yet as to, well, how much density how much could a property owner afford in a given location? And we have different areas of town. Some have ocean views, some have airport noise. So, we had a consultant actually go and look at everything just for that purpose to say, well, here's a program that we think will work in our city, generate some affordable housing. And as Bill says, you can look at the state and say, well, how would you have done it differently? I mean, if it's too expensive to do affordable housing, then you don't get any units, affordable or otherwise.
Other questions? Yeah.
Here. Hello. The California Coastal Commission usually thumbs their nose at, the state and the local jurisdictions. If you wanted to build, for sale housing in the coastal zone, which they typically don't want as for sale housing, can SB 330 overrule that?
Well,
Or is the Coastal Commission always exempt?
So I don't know if it's exempt. I do know that you're right that the Coastal Commission, where we do have some experience as well, their mandate always is things for the public. And housing is by definition private. So even affordable housing, they may say something, but they're not going to be very helpful unless the city, it doesn't, as long as it conforms to a city's approved coastal plan. So that is a problem if it's within Coastal Commission jurisdiction. But we did a large housing project in Santa Monica 12 years ago. It's within a mile of the coast, so had to go to the Coastal Commission. But there was an approved coastal plan. There was no issue, except they wanted more parking counter because that's
thing.
the public. It's
Yeah.
all about the public.
Public access.
I don't know that SB 330.
I don't know either.
I don't have any.
Yeah.
That might very well require the legislature.
And Bill, it's hard to
something.
know because that's a state agency.
The Coastal Commission
when they
is
adopt these things, and
Yeah,
it's a lesser agency
right.
at a local level.
That's
then
right.
It can be
That's
more,
right.
can be imposed.
It's a good question, and it gets to the larger question of how all-encompassing are these state mandates? Where are they not? Like I said, you go ultimate, any height, can you build in the coastal zone, et cetera, et cetera. And we have not seen any favoritism in coastal areas for affordable housing versus market rate housing. Couple other questions. Yes.
So you talk about how the RENA numbers tell cities to come up with the planning, but not necessarily get it built. I just start to wonder what's going to be that next step in the state legislature having some teeth in that regard, getting it built.
Well, it's already there. I mean, the teeth are there because when you present your plan, you have to come up with what's called a sites inventory, which is a listing of all the properties, and you divide up, you break it down by affordability. But when you get through with a list, at the bottom of that list is a total number of units that matches your RENA allocation. And then the state says, hey, great, love your list. What policies do you have in your housing element that are going to encourage those units to actually get built in those affordability ranges? Now, obviously, it's not going to get done at 49%, but it's going to get done at some level, and the state certification process is them looking at your plan and saying, no, we're not seeing the policies that you need to encourage these types of units. Now, they understand if it was 49%, no units would get built. But as I said, that's just their way of saying if you issue building permits, and they don't prohibit you from doing so, then you have to identify where the units are going to go, and if you have no more land in your housing element, you got to go rezone more land. So that's kind of what they're really after, but they have policy prescriptions that have to be followed, and then they monitor what you're up to. And I think you'll see more and more of those units, getting built over time. But as I say, the money has to come from somewhere, and it either comes out of maybe the landowner's pocket with land residual values going down, or federal subsidies, or state subsidies, or the biggest city subsidy is just your zoning at a density level, because the state doesn't dictate that. So, Newport Beach, we never had density levels over 30 units to the acre. And in our housing element update, we had a lot of properties that we said were 50. Well, when you have 50 units to the acre and you have a density bonus of 20%, it's really 60 units to the acre. But the trade-off is you have to have affordable units. So they're cobbling it together. I think it's kind of like things swung so far against development that now have swung the other way. I think they've gone too far. And at some point in time, we'll end up with something that everybody can understand and, makes sense, and our residents can understand.
I just want to add, though, more to your point. Right now, it is actually not clear, to me at least, what happens if the units don't get built. The state is focused on cities. You better prove to us that you're making it possible for those units to get built. But again, we cannot compel you all to come and build, or there to be enough materials and labor and all those, and financing and investors. So one thing I can tell you that we learned from this cycle of the RHNA is they'll add those units that weren't built to the next cycle. So we're not doing what we did before, which is pretending like we met the last cycle and moving on.
If you have a certified housing element and you're following your own policies and they don't get built, there's nothing that can happen.
For now.
That's true. But for right now, there is no punitive consequence for not getting the units built, as long as you've taken every step that they've told you have to take.
So this is hardly the last word on this subject. We're going to be hearing about this a lot in the next year and years to come, particularly as hopefully over the next couple of years, the market improves and maybe construction costs moderate. In any event, I want to thank our panel, and we'll look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
I want to thank some people before we disperse. Is again Marilyn Ellis, who helps organize putting this all together. Chase McNeil, who is key to having good media presence and in terms of making sure our report looks right and catches too much white space better than anybody I've ever seen before, among other things. Jayla Smith, who did the painstaking work of putting our migration data together. Again, my co-author, Arnab Dutta, who's not here, and the rest of the Lusk staff, thank you very much. And again, just the initial panel, Kitty, Scott, Tracy, thank you for bringing the real world to me. I really appreciate that. Selma Hepp, who flatters me by calling me her mentor, and then it occurs to me that's just a nice way of saying that you're old. But I'm going to give Selma 45 minutes to an hour next time, because boy, oh boy, there was a lot of stuff packed into there. And then Bill Witte for being willing to be the chair, there he is, Bill, of the Lusk board, and miracle worker Larry to bring Newport Beach into compliance. It would not be the top of my list among California cities. And I just want to say a word about Jenna. So I worked at HUD 6 or 7 years ago in the Obama administration. And one of the things that led me to appreciate is how great civil servants are. And we don't show enough respect to them. You go to Japan, you go to Singapore, you go to Korea, you go to the UK. People have a lot of respect for really good civil servants. And I think Jenna just demonstrated today how valuable people who are as mission-driven as she is and as capable as she is are to us socially. So Jenna, I don't know where she is now, but I want to just, beyond being here, I want to thank you for the work that you do. And then thank you all for coming today, and I hope to see you at the next one of these events. So have a great afternoon.